Hi, and welcome to the 72nd TiddlyWiki Hangout. I'm Jeremy Ruston, the inventor of TiddlyWiki, and I'm joined today from left to right on my screen by Branimir. Branimir, would you like to say hi, say where you're from, and something about your work with TiddlyWiki?
Hi, my name is Branimir and I'm from Sofia, Bulgaria, using TiddlyWiki 5 recently and from 3 years back started with TiddlyWiki Classic, being a user of TiddlyWiki both at work and for personal purposes.
Indeed. Great to have you here, Branimir. Glad that you could join us. Ed, would you like to say hi, where you're from,
Sure,
and tell us about your work with TiddlyWiki?
sure, yeah. My name's Ed Dixon. I'm from Las Cruces, New Mexico. I'm on a mission to try to create a student notebook for students I work with. And love TiddlyWiki. Not very adept at it yet, but learning it and enjoying learning it. So I think it's a wonderful thing.
Brilliant. Great to have you here. Thanks for joining us, Ed. And Eric, would you like to say hi and introduce yourself?
Hi there, I'm Eric Schulman. I'm the author of Tiddly Tools and the maintainer of the TiddlyWiki Classic core code base. I'm also the author, soon to be, of Inside TiddlyWiki, the missing manual. And I'm located in Silicon Valley, California.
Brilliant. Glad that you could join us, Eric. And finally, Mario, would you like to say, introduce yourself and tell us something about your work with TiddlyWiki?
Yeah, hi. My name is Mario Pitsch from Austria, near Salzburg. Contributed to TiddlyWiki Classic with themes and plugins, and yeah, working with TiddlyWiki 5 for the translations at the moment.
Indeed.
That's it.
Brilliant. Well, everybody, thank you very much for joining me today. Much appreciate your time. We'll get cracking straight away. And we're going to start by asking Eric to give us an update on his Indiegogo campaign. Would you like to tell us what's going on, Eric?
Sure. Well, just for folks who might not have been aware, I am working on a TiddlyWiki book, Inside TiddlyWiki, the missing manual. And in order to accomplish this, I've set up an Indiegogo fundraising campaign to give me living expense income while I write the book. And the campaign was started on November 15th, so approximately a month ago, a little less than a month ago. And the goal is a modest $7,500, of which we've currently had 26 contributions totaling $1,820, with from a lot of different countries. Actually, you know what I think I can do is I can screen share and show you a bit of the graphs and such.
That'd be very good to see. Yes, please do.
Let's see, here it is. So if we share this, does that look right? Yes, okay. So as you can see, the total amount raised and the percent funded, number of contributors. There's been 764 visits, and this is the overall contribution. There was an initial big amount of contributions during the first few days, and then it's sort of come in clusters since then. It's been a little bit quiet now, but I suspect that's just because it was the beginning of the month and people have other things to do with their money and pay the rent and such. But this is a little bit of a breakdown of the various countries that have contributed and their amounts. So as you can see, there's quite a few places. We're up to 5 screens worth now.
That's very cool.
And so these are all the countries: Kazakhstan, Albania, Macau. Very interesting. All the different places where this has reached to. Now this has not been, widely promoted. This is just through the word of mouth and the TiddlyWiki community itself. Let's see if there's any other interesting statistics here. Referrals are primarily coming through the Google links.
Yeah.
And yeah, that more or less. This is the interesting graphs here.
Yes.
So, so as you can see, the biggest single day was $600. And that was fairly early on in the first few days of the campaign, which is to be expected. There'll be people who are, ready to just open their pockets widely.
So
but I'd like to see a more steady per day level.
I guess, I mean, a lot depends on what the shape of other campaigns looks like, because I guess some of this might just be the natural way that campaigns run, that they have a spike at the beginning. But Eric, those vertical lines, are those the weekends? I'm just wondering, is this telling us that people mainly donate on a Friday or anything?
This was a Sunday. That's a Monday. This was a Wednesday. Wednesday was the biggest vertical line there. And then this was another Sunday after. And then this again is a weekend.
So
this littler bump here is also weekend.
So I don't know whether we can infer anything much from that. I'm just trying to think when the best time is to send out, reminder emails.
Right, and I'm also trying to think that what we need to do is, what I suspect is happening is we're getting contributions from the direct TiddlyWiki user community, but we haven't really expanded beyond our conventional existing audience.
Yes.
And so we somehow need to break through to the wider population. And in part, it's just going to be, it could be just simply word of mouth. People in the TiddlyWiki community talking to people who don't use TiddlyWiki, but telling them how wonderful this is.
Indeed, indeed. Well, let's. Oh, there is one thing that we haven't done yet that might help, which is to put a link to the campaign on the TiddlyWiki homepage.
That could help some. But again, that's still mostly going to catch people who are already in the existing audience.
Yeah.
We need to somehow expand outward beyond the existing audience. I'm also going to be I'm thinking to offer a few fundraising incentives here and there. Potentially, there could be a sort of a matching funds challenge with an existing donor. The other thing I was thinking is having a one-day perk upgrade, so that if you make a donation at one level, you'll get the next level's perks instead.
That's a very good idea. That's an excellent
and just have it sort of like, if you donate in the next 24 hours, you get the perk upgrade.
Yeah. No, I like that. I like that.
So, but the overall goal here is to figure out how to increase the audience that is considering donating. Because if we just rely on the TiddlyWiki community, I think we're going to come up short.
Well, I mean, I think there is traffic to TiddlyWiki.com that doesn't go anywhere near the Google groups, so that will, I think that might make a modest difference. Moving beyond the TiddlyWiki community is, well, it's a topic I was going to bring up as well in connection with TiddlyWiki itself, actually. But before I do that, because I've got it on my list, you said before the call, Eric, that you were hoping able to actually begin work on the book imminently. And so I guess, given the interactive, open nature of the authoring process, that means that you'll be sharing drafts soon. Is that the case?
Yes, the initial goal I've already set up, but I haven't actually sent out the invitations yet to the Inside TiddlyWiki discussion group. And so everyone who has made a contribution will be getting an invite to join that group. And the first thing I'm going to post up there will be a rough outline of the first volume of Inside TiddlyWiki, the introductory user's guide, suggesting the top-level chapter headings and some of what the content of each chapter might be. And that's the first thing to be discussed and get feedback on, is what should the actual content of the book be before I actually start writing drafts of individual sections. So the first thing I'll be putting up there as a draft is a draft outline. And then once there's some consensus that the outline actually covers the right material, then I'll start writing, filling in the outline and posting up drafts as they become, substantial enough to actually present.
Eric, I would publish the outline publicly on the TiddlyWiki group, but make the contribution, let's say, dependent on the donation. So so everyone which is interested can see what actually will be there, and if they want to discuss and want to change it or add functions or whatever, then they should contribute, so that you can highlight the different topics for everyone. But someone who wants to contribute or who wants to change the direction, or I don't know, has to donate.
On the one hand, I'm inclined towards posting it to the public group to create interest. On the other hand, I don't really want to say to people, you can't give feedback if you haven't paid. But that's kind of what I've already done.
It should be only let's say a teaser, yeah, so that you can say. So you don't need to write there. Okay, you are not allowed to say anything if you don't donate. But I think public teaser would be good.
Okay, what I'm thinking of now is periodically putting a report of what the activities of the Inside TiddlyWiki working group have done in terms of, when we reach the outline, for example, when the outline sort of starts to gel, then posting it up as a sort of report. This is what Inside TiddlyWiki working group is doing if you want to join. But yeah, periodically, I think it would be good to just keep the general community updated on how things are going. Otherwise, it does become a little sort of walled garden process, and I don't really want that.
Oh, sorry, Eric, you got.
Yeah, I'm okay. So.
So I said thank you very much, Eric, and of course we all wish you the best of luck for the campaign. I'm very pleased to see the positive results. I mean, goodness, it's like giving a party, and one's fear when giving a party is that nobody's going to turn up, I think. So it may not be a party in which people are falling out of the windows yet, but it's still a very healthy turnout, and that's great to see. You started to talk about moving outside of the TiddlyWiki community for the appeal, and it reminded me of something that I was wanting to talk about, which is, I guess we have talked about it before, but it's PR, and it's the idea that TiddlyWiki would benefit from more press coverage, using press, I guess, in the loosest possible sense of the word, to mean everything from blogs up to newspapers and TV shows and things. And it strikes me that I've never run I've never run the tech section of a newspaper, but I guess to some degree their problem is finding things to write about, and I think it would be the case that one of the ways that publications find things to write about is things that their readers suggest. So I'd been wondering whether just trying to gently encourage people to drop a line to their favorite or local publication might be a good way to start turning the handles on the word of mouth a little. One of the things that gave me a lot of confidence earlier in the year was when we had quite a nice small article in the digital edition of a Swiss daily newspaper. And the reason why I thought it was encouraging was that, I mean, obviously it was the tech section of said newspaper, but nonetheless, there was some recognition that TiddlyWiki was of interest to this, general, presumably semi-technical audience. So my thought was that maybe, I mean, I guess it's a post to the group to trigger it off, but that maybe I should be suggesting to the group that everybody tries to make a list of the places where they read stuff, be it their local newspaper or their favorite web blog or Hacker News or what have you, and simply encourage people to make a submission. And I guess,
Jeremy?
hello.
Yes, I am also reminded of the poster challenge.
Oh yes, yes, I forgot about that. Yeah.
And that has two aspects to it. One is that the challenge itself is trying to encourage people to think about how to promote TiddlyWiki, and the other is that once the poster exists, the intention is to stick it up all over the place on college campuses and other places where a new TiddlyWiki audience might catch a glimpse of it and say, "Whoa, what is that? Why is there a poster about a piece of software on my bulletin board?"
Yes, indeed, indeed.
That might help boost the size of the audience as well. And as far as the journalism goes, I'm thinking if you've read an article about a piece of software in your local, online or in some printed publication, and you think, wow, that guy who wrote that article could write an article about TiddlyWiki. So just what you should do is write a letter back to the guy who wrote the article saying, I really appreciated your article about such and such. Now let me tell you about this program I'm using you might be interested in covering.
Exactly that. Exactly that. And if we all, in a way, I don't think I'm the best person to do it, if you see what I mean, because I'm not an unbiased user of TiddlyWiki, but almost everybody else in the community is, they're of their own volition, and so conceivably makes for good testimonial. And yes, of course, I think in some cases one could add to that the Eric's Indiegogo campaign as one of the reasons for making it timely. The other thing I was thinking about is that TiddlyWiki is still associated with personal effectiveness, to-do lists, and so on. So at least in Western cultures, the new year at the end of this month, that's a natural time where the press loves to talk about New Year's resolutions, how to be more efficient in 2015 than you were in 2014, and so on. Any thoughts about any of that? Eric mentioned the poster campaign, the poster competition, forgive me. This is, I will just bring it up and then I'll screen share. Matt Goldman, who has been on the Hangout several times, came up with this idea, and it's to have a, get rid of that, sorry. He's offering to contribute $100 in the name of the winner to Eric's campaign for designing an A4 poster for attracting people to TiddlyWiki. And in the thread, Matt makes some points about what would make a good poster and so on. I think it's a lovely idea, very generous of Matt to put his money where his mouth is. And of course, I think a poster is a very flexible way, a very useful and flexible way of attracting attention. I was just going to briefly show. This is a poster that I did last year when I was running TiddlyWiki interest group meetings here in Oxford, which I haven't done since last winter. And very typical Jeremy, it's got quite a lot of words on it. But I put it up in lots of cafes and places like that in Oxford. Can I do that? Yes, it might make it easier to read. And slightly frustratingly, in a way, I don't really know what people thought about it. I mean, I guess one should lurk in the cafe, wait till you see somebody reading the poster, and then run up to them and ask for their opinion. But I didn't do that. So, but anyway, I mean, common sense suggests that it's got far too many words on it. There were 2 or 3 people, I think, who came because of the poster. I mean, as in they, that was how they found out about it. So I hope that everybody will be encouraged to enter it. I think it's fair to say that artistic skills aren't required, because that's quite, I'm sure we can fix that. I think what'll be fun and interesting, I hope, is the imagination and ideas of that people are trying to express. Any thoughts on that stuff?
I'd just like to summarize that we've identified two avenues. One is to contact tech journalists and encourage them to review TiddlyWiki publicly to spread the word further, and the other is the sort of the poster campaign or poster competition to get people involved in thinking themselves about how to describe and promote TiddlyWiki. So the question is, what other avenues different than those two can we think of? And I don't, off the top of my head, I can't think of any at the moment, but this is one of the areas where we could do more thinking, is what ways can we reach other audiences that are simply not hearing about TiddlyWiki? I mean, part of it is the sort of the sell. How do you convince people that TiddlyWiki is interesting and useful? But there's a certain low-hanging fruit of people who will simply immediately sort of go, oh, I see what that is. This is very cool. But they haven't been exposed to it at all. They're not aware of TiddlyWiki, and that simply making them aware will get a certain percentage of response just by increasing awareness, rather than trying to come up with a better message. Simply finding new audiences to reach with the message is probably going to be a very effective way of boosting TiddlyWiki.
I agree. And it could happen anywhere as well. I mean, there's TiddlyWiki is being used in China and so on. Doesn't need to be a Western European newspaper or publication.
I was trying to think if there's a way to. This sounds terribly self-serving and crass, but to capitalize on the social political unrest. In the way that people are being very untrustful of official organizations and government and such, and that TiddlyWiki is a form of disruptive technology. It takes the control out of the web administrator's hands and puts it back into your hands. And so in some sense it could appeal to those folks who are looking, the people who like disruptive technology.
Yes, there's quite a good way into this, actually. Let me just show you something. So the thing about that stuff, technology that has become more interesting in the light of the Snowden revelations, is that there's quite a lot of it. There's already an established community of hackers and activists who are responding to those threats by trying to develop new generations of open source technology that are easier to trust. One such project is a thing called BiblioBox, and I should just go there. BiblioBox is the French version of what's also called a pirate box, and the pirate box is a little Wi-Fi device that you use, so that you have somewhere in the location, people around you can connect to it via Wi-Fi and do file sharing and share apps. So it's a way of bringing the cloud down to earth and therefore being in control of it. But it's about the same stuff as the web. It's about sharing and collaborating and so on. So without us having done anything, the people, at least Sylvain, who many of you will know from the groups, has been instrumental in getting TiddlyWiki connected with that software stack. And yeah, I think that means that there's a kind of a community out there of, so what you were talking about finding journalists. Any journalist who's ever talked about Pirate Box or the French equivalent, BiblioBox, you'd think might well be interested in TiddlyWiki, because it is such a good match for those, a good answer to those concerns. Okay, if there's any other thoughts, otherwise I was going to move on. Um, there was another topic that came up, in fact, today in the discussion groups that I thought was worth talking about. And uh, it's this post by Stephen Kimmel. Again, many of you'll know Stephen, who's a very regular poster on the group. And I think he made a post a day or two ago along similar lines, but this is a very detailed post where he's basically started doing user testing with people, I guess people that he knows. He describes them as victims and then corrects that to volunteers. And he emphasizes that they're computer literate ones, well educated, have been through higher education, but not programmers. Or he points out all of them know what the word macro meant. So I think that gives a very good indication of how technical they are. Stephen makes the point that they're the kind of people who might try it. It might try something if it's recommended to them. I think it sounds like he's right that they're the sort of person that we would like to be able to attract to the project. So Stephen tried to get people to download an empty TiddlyWiki and get it working by saving changes. And he did this with minimal intervention. So I think the experiment was you can see here it kicks off with the test subject G was able to find the TiddlyWiki site and then starts the download process. Then it goes, to be fair, downhill. The first hurdle was that I think this must mean that they're in Firefox. An oddity of Firefox is that when you press the download button, you get a file with a GUID as its name, and that's not what the documentation says. Confused the user, and they would have given up at that point if they weren't having being forced to proceed. And then Stephen describes problems the subject had with creating tiddlers. So the user typed the name of the tiddler in the search window. Don't quite understand this, then enter a tag name slot and a field name slot. And then it looks like they did manage to, and then halfway through, they realized they wanted to be able to look at the documentation, so they were lost. And so on, and so on. So there's some suggestions from Stephen, some conclusions. First one, fair enough, is get away from the current download mechanism to one that downloads a file with the expected name. Getting one with an apparently random name is confusing at best. Hello?
Jeremy? Yeah, I did a post. If we create a link to tiddlyWiki.com/index.html and then press the download button, Firefox will download an index.html file. So if we manage to do a redirect or something like this, then it works the right way.
Yes, I don't think that's enough to make the issue go away, because the time when you get the nonsense file name, I believe.
At the point is that there's an information in point 5 in the download documentation which says locate the file that you just downloaded, and then you may rename it. And there is some information. There's just not the file looks like nonsense.
Right, but so I understand what you're saying, that if we direct them to do the download by clicking on a link to TiddlyWiki to the file on TiddlyWiki.com with the download attribute, then you're pointing out that we'll get more consistent download behavior. And I think you're right that all browsers will download that file with a sensible initial name. But don't you then, if you try and save changes in Firefox, which saves through the base64 URI, don't you get that same nonsense file name back again? into
No, because if you open it from file, it is named index.html, so it gives you a good default file name.
Mario, are you saying that the garbled, ugly file name only occurs when you access remotely via the directory without specifying the file name?
Yes,
Okay,
if you
so as long as there's a .html on the end of the URL, you
yeah
get the name of the file that you're viewing rather than the random. Because I think that long string comes out of the cache.
no, this
Out
is
of the
a
browser
security
cache.
mechanism that you don't get download from two files with the same name. So
Oh, okay. It's just a random hash to keep things from
yeah,
colliding.
yeah, absolutely. One moment, just testing. Okay.
Ah,
Um,
no, okay. So I completely misunderstood what you were saying, Mary. Um, uh, so what you're talking about, in fact, I'd interpreted what you were suggesting as being that at the moment in getting started, what we have here, that download empty button is is the download wiki button. So basically,
mhm.
so it uses the saver mechanism to save. I thought you were suggesting that we direct people to save from a link like that, which we can do, of course, with the download attribute. But in
Yeah,
fact, what you're pointing out is that if I do that save here like this, then I get the nonsense name. But if I change
yes,
the URL to be index.html and do the same thing, that now I got index.html. Now the
right.
reason why that's happening is not Firefox's fault. The reason why that's happening is my fault. It's so in the download saver. So this is the HTML5 fallback saver, the thing that uses the download attribute. If the document location has
Yeah,
I
probably.
need to double check this, but I think this is my fault because
Okay, yeah,
I'm
then we can
picking.
fix it. So
Because yes, no, exactly. I think possibly we can fix it. I think I'm picking out that this logic is supposed to, in the situation where we do a download where there's no index.html, it's supposed to default to tiddlywiki.html,
yeah, but
which
Firefox
is,
doesn't use this. Yeah.
which it evidently isn't doing. But the thing is, at the time when this happens, um, the it's the same code that I'm calling. Or are you saying, so if I do, there isn't one. Okay, so now I need to do some experiments with some files that aren't called index.html, I think.
You can use, I don't know, a demo, one of them. But okay, well, yeah, if you have a closer look, probably we can solve this problem. Yeah. Because yeah, as I said, the documentation says something about renaming the name, but it doesn't tell the user that it uses, let's say, the default name is stupid.
No, but I think we've jumped down to quite a detailed level. Let's whiz through the other bits of feedback, and then we'll try and draw some conclusions.
Mm.
So. Several comments are basically about the getting started tiddler, and that's a very good point. The getting started tiddler that's in empty.html is really out of date. As somebody, it might have been Mario, recently said, it doesn't use the icons. It talks about the download button in the sidebar. There's a link to Wikitext documentation, but I mean, is that even the correct? Yeah, and that link, this is so old that it links to the static version of the Wikitext documentation. Doesn't even link to the to TiddlyWiki.com itself, and that's because we didn't have permalinks at the time that this getting started text was first written. So all of that very accepted, and looks like, pending the outcome of that technical investigation, that one may be resolvable. Although I must say, Mario, if we need to do a redirect from TiddlyWiki.com to TiddlyWiki.com/index.html, I think that's a problem on GitHub. I mean, as in, I don't think I'll be able to on GitHub. So we might find, once we've fully understood the situations in which Firefox uses the gobbledygook file name, it does seem possible that we'll discover that we can't actually work around it. But I was going to make another point that I do wonder about the strategy here. The individual it looks like they were told, sat and used TiddlyWiki, so it's not clear what their motivation, if any, was. Well, I guess their motivation was to be tolerant of the demands of Stephen, but it kind of seems the wrong way round, in that I think the more common experience is to arrive at TiddlyWiki.com, to explore it a little, to decide that you like it, and then deciding to find out how to download it and start using it. And it does strike me that the experience, if I've understood the experience that the user G went through, it feels like it must have, well, pretty much as it says here, that they were banging their head against a brick wall without any obvious benefit at the end. So I guess it's a really useful data point, because by definition, the people who are in the community, who participate in the Hangouts and who participate on the Google groups, are people who are over that hurdle. They've learned how to use TiddlyWiki. I think some of the complexity of the first-time user experience is because what TiddlyWiki does, saving changes to the local file system, is complicated. And I do... Sorry?
Tell me. I just posted a link in the German version. I did create some short intro videos. They are directly linked from Hello There, or let's say Getting Started. In German it means Erste Schritte. I'd found out at the moment that there is something broken, but I did some videos, I don't know, 5 minutes each, which shows downloading and saving and all these mechanisms.
Right, and I think that's one of the critical points that Stephen mentions. G never made, oh sorry, I'm not screen sharing, but G never made it as far as the documentation. So what Stephen's saying here, there's been a lot of discussion in the Hangouts and in the discussion groups about the need to improve the documentation, and now there's a gratifying amount of activity around it. But Stephen is reminding us that a lot of users never go to the documentation. So what I'm reading here is a reminder, not that we shouldn't make videos, obviously. I think videos are a great idea. Not that we shouldn't write documentation. I think documentation is a great idea. But it's a reminder that there is something else that needs to be fixed carefully too, or paid attention to as well. And that is this user experience that they're covering here, the getting started user experience. And that is partly a matter of the copy on in the Getting Started Tiddler, links from the Getting Started Tiddler. The technical discussion we had is, interestingly, it's not so much about fixing how the download process works, it's about making it consistent between browsers. I think the issue we've got with the gobbledygook is that I believe that I chose not to explicitly document the issue with the files being downloaded with the gobbledygook file name because it made the instructions complicated and more inconsistency in the instructions. So, I don't know. It makes me think that I need to. Well, there's two very clear suggestions to address the immediate concerns about simplifying the saving process, downloading process, and updating the getting started tiddler. But it just reminds me that we mustn't take things for granted in the basic usability of TiddlyWiki. I tend to think that how TiddlyWiki works is very discoverable, but I think that probably just says a lot about the way that I personally use software. So TiddlyWiki is good for people who are happy to kind of scan the screen and hover over each icon and figure out what it's for, and it repays that kind of energy spent in exploring it. But I suspect that me and the other people who do that are very, very atypical of normal users. Another conclusion for me, though, is said I don't think the fact that this is about somebody who didn't read the documentation doesn't mean that we shouldn't write documentation, but it does make me think that the documentation needs to be brief. One of the simplest sounding ways to make documentation seem simple is to make it very chatty, to have lots of unnecessary introductions to sentences that I think is actually not terribly useful for us, partly because of English not being the first language of everybody who uses TiddlyWiki and consults the documentation. And so I'm already quite conscious that I think I need to avoid using some idioms and keep my vocabulary more basic in the documentation so it's more broadly understandable.
Why do you say that, Jeremy? That you need to make it chatty? What will that make things better?
No, I'm saying that that I try to make the documentation be quite formal. So
it should be like that. Why are you saying it's not good? This is
no,
not the problem.
I'm saying that some of the contributions and suggestions that I have seen for documentation is chatty. So I'm not saying that's good. I'm saying that there is very chatty documentation out there. And in fact, if you look at the difference between the stuff that's currently on TiddlyWiki.com, if you compare the stuff that I wrote with the stuff that Dave wrote, Dave Gifford, that is, there's a very clear difference that Dave's part of how Dave has made TiddlyWiki more approachable is by using much chattier language. Let me show you what I mean.
I think there is also one point that in your documentation it has to be exact and right, but that's not important for the user. For the user it has to be true, but it doesn't have to be the whole truth. Yeah?
Yes, I think that's right. I think that's a very good point.
Yeah.
I'd like to make the distinction between documentation, which is sort of reference materials, which have to be accurate and complete, and documentation, which is instructional, which is more oriented around accomplishing a goal as opposed to defining all the possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
And that mostly I find that I learn best when the first things I'm presented with are solutions or processes for achieving a goal that I already can understand, a small goal, and say, here's how to do this task. And by doing that, I'm exposed to a number of mechanisms. And then I go, oh, I want to know more about how this mechanism works, and I can dig into the more referencey content to find out what all the possibilities are. Now that I've seen it used once, I can then go, oh, now I want to know more about it. So there's a kind of a two-stage process. First, getting people to understand what it's good for, and then getting them to understand how it works.
Mm-hmm.
That is one side, correct. I agree that it should be both instructional and accurate. But I think what is lacking here is not the chattiness and the excess of different words and idioms. What is lacking here is actually examples, real-life examples.
Branimir, sorry, I should just to be clear, I'm in case I left it confusing, I'm saying the documentation should not be chatty,
Okay.
and that it should use the simplest possible vocabulary to state clearly and ambiguously what's going on. And I'm suggesting that the temptation that people feel writing documentation to make it very chatty is a mistake. As a writer, if you're putting in lots of sort of hand-holding, now you try this, and I mean, obviously I can't extemporize good examples, but it's kind of quite easy to write when it's very chatty like that, but I don't think it's easy to understand, and as I say, I think it narrows the audience to people who can parse more complicated English.
I agree, and not everyone. I mean, everyone that I have met doesn't like to read. I mean, people just want to see things working. That's why examples is the best thing about the documentation. Me, myself, I'm writing documentation for my team, and actually I'm writing it for myself. I show you the one with the shell script.
Yes.
And what I put there is mainly just 1 or 2 sentences explain what I'm giving, and then everything else is examples.
Yes.
When I see the example, I want to refer myself to how I used to do things properly before when I want to do it again in the same way. So it's the same with TiddlyWiki. I mean, I've been reading documentation and scanning and searching for things here and there, but everywhere I just see very simple, small or missing examples. I want to see something more complex. And I can give you an example, actually. I was looking for how to do a filter ORing tags. For example, I want to do a list of links with all titles that have either one tag or another. And believe me, this took me about 15 minutes to find it in the documentation. I mean, it was hidden in a place where, I mean, I cannot imagine. This is something, I mean, ending and ORing during filtering, yeah, it may be idioms, but it's something that tells you what you want to achieve.
I think the documentation for the filters, there you have at least 1 or 2 pages for every possible option which is in there. So there, I don't know, that there will be about 100 pages of examples for sure that you really can that you really can define a filter afterwards, because there are so many possibilities.
Yes, they are.
So yeah, there
well,
will,
I think there's 2 things going on here.
Jeremy, a short. Tobias joined.
Oh, great.
I'd like to just chime in with the idea that and I put it in the box there, that there's a narrative style of documentation and a declarative style. And with the narrative style, you tell a story. You start at the beginning, and there's a lot of that chattiness that Jeremy is talking about. It doesn't have to be particularly chatty. It can be somewhat formal, but it's still a narrative style. It has this sort of time progression. First do this, then do that, and we'll show you how to do stuff. The declarative style is more like, this is a form of that, and that has the following options, and it's sort of more of a top-down reference sort of, and you have to build up within your mind the understanding of what each object is and what its properties and behaviors are, and then once you know those things, then the procedures you should follow sort of fall out naturally. So if you use a declarative style, then you're leaving it as an exercise to the reader to construct the sequence of activities. As I don't know that this is necessarily any better, but pointing to my Tiddly Tools plugins and the way I documented them. Each plugin, there was a very sort of consistent way of talking about it. There was a description at the top, which was like 2 or 3 sentences about what is it for, what is it good for, and that could be free form in terms of whether it was narrative or declarative. Then there was a sort of a usage section which defined the syntax and all the options and such, and then there was an examples, and the example always sort of showed one very basic simple usage and then one more complex usage. And so by doing it in that way, the first thing you get is a summary of, well, what is this good for? So it tells you whether you should be interested.
Thanks, Eric. So just picking up some of that, there was I think 2 topics that Branimir brought up that we can separate a bit. One was about examples. So what I was going to say about that was that for a long time the reference documentation didn't have examples, but now the structure that I try to aim for is an introduction that says what a widget is, the formal documentation for reference of what the parameters are, and in some cases there are detailed notes as subheadings under that content and attributes, and then a list of examples. So the point I'm making here is that I believe that in order to fix this problem about examples, we need to establish a standard format, pretty much as Eric said, for each item of documentation. Where we are at the moment is there's plenty of them that are incomplete. So here we go, the image widget lacks any instructions. Lacks any examples, as a for instance. So there's 2 parts to it. Yeah, we need to decide what the and of course I thought I was screen sharing while I was doing all of that, and I wasn't. There's 2 parts to it. Therefore, we need to decide on the optimal format for the tiddlers describing reference documentation items, such as widgets and filters and so on. And then we need to go around and make sure that all the documentation follows that convention. And at the moment, we're still living with an awful lot of documentation that's really old. You know, the last modification date on much of the documentation is, in some cases, a year old. So that stuff needs to be updated. But then I think Branimir moved on to something slightly different when you were talking about filters, because filters, there is an attempt in the introduction to filters, Tiddler, to make a proper narrative introduction to what filters do. So broken up into steps, it introduces one concept at a time, gradually building them up. And there is, of course, a section about ORing multiple filter operators. So I think that the problem here isn't that we haven't documented how you OR multiple filter operators. It's that the route to reaching that documentation is clumsy.
Yeah, it is there. I found it, but it just took me a lot of time.
Yes, but I think that's, well, I mean, this is a perfect example. Hopefully I'm screen sharing now. So here's, this is I was speaking this. Here's introduction to filters. So, you know, hopefully that says this is where to start with filters, and then it's split into sections, and section 9 or something is ORing multiple filter operators. So I think there's, you know, some of the time I think it's important that we have decent searching, but in this case, searching for ORing is a bit useless because ORing is the end of lots of words, I guess.
Yeah.
Flavoring and so on. I think this is a really tough problem. So people classically, they suggest we need an FAQ, so that we'd have a tiddler saying, how do you filter on more than one tiddler at once? And I think that type of documentation has its place, but I've not just my conclusion, but what I've read from other sources as well, is that it doesn't scale well. Once you've got an FAQ with 300 questions in it, you've just got a big black bag. The
it could be made in topics, of course, and subtopics.
But you see that's what I'm saying, is that there is this ORing multiple filter operators is, you know, not trying to defend the documentation. What I'm saying is that what would seem like an obvious answer is, I think, already in place, and it's not sufficient. And the reason why it's not sufficient is particularly obviously because it's buried in the middle of a very long tiddler. But even if it was a separate tiddler, that ORing multiple filter operators, I think it's quite a tricky one to find. I mean, you know, you expressed it as ORing, which is, you know, usefully the kind of technical term for it.
Yeah, but that's because I have found it like this before, but I just couldn't remember where I have found it.
And exactly,
I think there is also one problem. There is a description of how you create the filter tag, but there is no copy paste example that you copy and paste into a new tiddler and you actually get something. So even if you copy paste the content of this ORing, you just have to wrap it into a list links, or how is it called?
Yeah, it's like that.
A list widget.
Yes.
In this case,
I think what
or the list macro.
I think what it should be doing is pointing you at the advanced search dialog, because that's the easiest place to try out filters. And there is a technique that we've that's been in since 5.15.
Jeremy,
We can link to the advanced search dialog and automatically switch to the filter tab and fill in the content of the search box as well.
Yeah, or we need some links to some let's say additional documentation, like the link I posted to Tobias Tilly.
Yes, I was going to mention
TiddlyWiki already, because as I see it, he already starts again to make something similar to TiddlyWiki.org. There you have your filter dialogues, and pretty much every issue that popped up in the Google groups is now a tiddler at Tobias' place, and I think it contains only examples, and copy pasting those examples into your own TiddlyWiki, I think, will help a lot.
I think we've kind of run into two paths of discussion here on this. One is how to improve the documentation so that once you've reached the appropriate place in the documentation, you know what to do, and that's, you know, giving good examples and here, click here, try it now, whatever. But the bigger problem, and the one that's harder to solve, is how do you get people to the right place in the documentation? And if it's not done by a sort of a browse down from the top level, you know, sort of like Jeremy says, well, start from here and then, you know, scroll down, you'll find the 9th item is such and such, and so it's a top-down sort of browsing. Then there's searching, and as Jeremy pointed out, searching for the term ORing may or may not be effective to find the correct topic. And then, of course, the problem is I might not use a technical term like ORing. I might say I want to combine filters. And so what's the right way to index into the documentation, I think, is the tougher problem to solve. I think it's pretty clear that we can write better documentation that gives people more examples and things like that, and that's something we should definitely do. But yes, keyword searches and context text searches and all, how do you get people to the right piece of information, especially if they don't know what it's called? You have to sort of, because people try to search cleverly. They try to predict what's the right words to use to find what they're looking for, and so anyway, that's the point I want to make, is that there's two parts to this problem. One is how to better document what we can tell them, and the other is how to get them to that documentation.
Well, I think some of these, of course, are being addressed in the TW Docs group. So we've ended up discussing what the documentation should be like. And that's one area where we're lucky enough to have quite a few people contributing right now. Tobias, are you in that group? You're in?
I joined it. Yes, I joined the discussion a bit, but all the structuring and whatever the ideas are that are being expressed, it's more of a discussion right now, I think, because like the actual place where all this is going to take place is rather undefined, it seems, unless we're talking about TiddlyWiki.com. So,
I think we've made some pretty what's the word, clear plans. So we need to accept updates to TiddlyWiki.com. And we need to work up tools so that people can submit a modified version of the standalone index.html from TiddlyWiki.com in order to submit documentation updates. And we also want to get this Tiddly Space set up. We'll reclaim TiddlyWiki.org for TiddlyWiki 5. And there's this introduction edition, which I'm suggesting, and I'm not sure that this is necessarily something that we've in any sense reached consensus on, but I'm suggesting that that should be a step-by-step interactive lesson for learning to use TiddlyWiki. There was a proposal that we made, I think it was in the last Hangout, which is that, which I'm also thinking about, which is moving all the documentation off to tiddlywiki.com/docs, so that tiddlywiki.com itself is just the kind of landing page that says hello and explains what TiddlyWiki is, and is the news and links to other resources. And that appeals to me because it's asking a lot of the one website to be both the authoritative documentation and the shop window, and I think it would be nice to separate them so that we can, hopefully make those two roles, produce things that are better for those two roles.
Yeah.
So documentation stuff, not trying to move away too much from that discussion, but I think there's a framework in place there. There's discussion going on. There's a continual. It's hard work to turn that discussion into documentation contributions. I think Branimir's two examples suggest to me that there's a lot of discussion about the really difficult, unanswerable questions. How do you get people over the initial hurdles of using TiddlyWiki? But Branimir is reminding us that we need to also get the reference basics back. No discussion needed in order for people to contribute a example of how the count widget, for example. It's a very easy thing to do, and there's lots of obvious holes in that regard. So that's an excellent point, Branimir. The need to increase the proportion of the documentation that carries useful examples.
My general point here was, yeah, sorry, what?
Please go on, sorry, Brad.
Okay, my general point here was that TiddlyWiki is a wiki, and wiki is about two things: information and finding that information easily. And that is in the essence of a wiki. So the point is to be able to find. I'm pretty sure everything is there about the documentation. It's about how it's arranged. It's not about the technology here. It's about the thinking that is used to linkify and arrange this information in a way that is easily digestible and findable, if I can say.
No, I hear that loud and clear, and I think I was. That's what I was trying to show by the frustration that, in one sense, the answer you were looking for about ORing tags is there, and in another sense, it's really not accessible by being buried 9 deep in a long tiddler. It's almost impossible to find. So I agree entirely that there's that kind of structuring need. I would note that there is some of the discussion that's been going on about the documentation is about just that, is about the large scale and small scale structuring. But I wanted
What
to
I would think
return
is,
to.
oh, sorry,
Sorry,
I
no,
didn't mean
keep
to
going
interrupt
first.
you.
No, it's all right. I
What I
was
would
going to
think is
slightly
like,
change the subject, so carry on before I do.
okay, so if we were to exclude all these documentation topics from TiddlyWiki.com, I think it would be important to still have the references in that context, so that you can search for maybe just like the titles of that stuff,
Well,
but it would point you to the new location.
It would. I think TiddlyWiki.com wouldn't necessarily even expose its search box very much. It would look perhaps more like a classical open source project with 3 columns, little icons with the description under each of them.
Okay.
Scroll down to a download button, and then there would be a docs link that would open TiddlyWiki.com/docs. So it does. I'm not sure it's a great idea because it does make things more complicated. There's more browser tabs we'll all have to have open, and there's more things that I need to maintain. But as I say, I've been aware for a while that in trying to serve these 2 purposes, that does make it quite a challenge. And now that we've got other people stepping up to contribute to the documentation, I again think that would be a bit easier if the documentation no longer has to worry about being the front page and selling to TiddlyWiki.
Also, if I think about my user behavior, if I go to an open source project, in normal cases you have the landing page, which has some introductory with it. Then I have a look for the docs link. Then I have a look for the API link, and then I have a look for the pricing. If there is a company behind it, yeah. But that's the let's say the 3 things I'm interested in. Yeah. So is there a documentation I can read? Is there an API I can use? And how much does it cost? And if it's free, okay. Yeah. Then maybe there is a GitHub link where I can see the source.
Yes, I think it's. That you're starting to, in terms of the front page, what you're reminding me of is, I guess there's expectations that people who've interacted with open source software would normally have. How do I get to the GitHub repo? How do I get to the docs, and so on, as you listed? And I agree that the landing page needs to provide those answers very easily for those people that are looking for those things. But of course, it also has to serve as a jumping off point for G, who was the person that Stephen was interviewing. So that's same challenge as before, probably. Hi, Nathan. How are you doing? Nathan's microphone-less, I suspect.
I just want to say that when I start looking at a piece of software on a site, what I want to see on the very first page, above the fold, as they say, without having to scroll, is what is this? I want 2 or 3 sentences. What is this? And then sometimes I want to dig in, as you say, through the various facets, but sometimes I just want to have a button that says start here, and that it takes you through a series of very simple screens of sort of snapshots, diagrams, explaining what it is and how it's intended to be used. And then once I've looked through that sort of slideshow of description, then I go, okay, now let me see, how do I download it and install it? And then where's the documentation?
Yeah, and I go for the documentation first because I don't download anything that I don't know. And so that's why I'm looking for some description for the video, for the documentation, and then maybe I download.
I agree with that, but that I find that most of the documentation is incredibly chewy. and takes too much effort to try to get the full picture from. And that what I'd like them to do is to give me the elevator summary, the elevator pitch, sort of that idea of you have just the time in an elevator to tell people about your project. And I'd like to see the elevator summary for TiddlyWiki at least as a prominent link from the very first Tiddler that you see. From getting started, I'd like to see what is this?
Yeah.
And
I would like
a decision maker can base some their decisions on.
Yeah, I also like your example, so that you get asked some questions. Okay, do you like or do you want to have a TiddlyWiki that can make to-dos? Do you want to have a TiddlyWiki for, I don't know, documenting description, technical stuff, or do you want a TiddlyWiki for writing prose or something like this? And then the user clicks, okay, I'm making I don't know, something, a book. Yeah?
So these would be more task-oriented focus for people who are coming in saying, I understand TiddlyWiki can do things. Which kind of thing do I want?
Yeah.
And then take them to some more focused presentation, which explains how to do that kind of process rather than the generic overall. This is TiddlyWiki. It's wonderful. It can be everything to everybody.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if we have a landing page and then some questions, I think this would be enough for the beginning, and then we need the links to the docs, somewhere, and the pricing. So that's it.
I was wanting to return to what I still think is a very interesting observation of Stephen's, which is that the test subject that he was working with didn't read the documentation, and so I worry therefore that all this discussion about deepest details of the documentation, if we're actually losing people long before that's the point that's a problem. We've discussed how we could need to improve the getting started material, and we discussed the thing about the downloads. But is there anything else we can do? And the other thing that had occurred to me was that it's much easier to get started with TiddlyWiki, of course, if you use it on TiddlySpot, because then it's a much more conventional online experience. The people that the person that Stephen was interviewing, he said, I think that the individual was somebody who would try things out, when suggested. And of course, your normal expectation with a website, as opposed to a piece of software, will be some slight variation of what Mario said, where you read some text, and then your expectation is that you're going to create a user account, and if you're cautious about the service, maybe you'll use one of your throwaway email addresses for it. So, for a long time, TiddlyWiki has presented itself as though the best way, the best way to get started is to learn how to save changes locally. And yet, we see from the discussions in the community that people rely on TiddlySpot all the time. And of course, it's now become the way, it's the way that everybody shares their TiddlyWiki material by default, really. So maybe that's a thought, that we should bring TiddlySpot to the front. Maybe we'd need to work with Daniel and Simon to get TiddlyWiki 5 built into TiddlySpot, because as you know, at the moment, by going to tiddlyspot.com, you can't get a TiddlyWiki 5. You can only get a TiddlyWiki Classic. But that...
I believe Daniel said that they were going to be doing that shortly.
Yes, I think it's on their list, yes, indeed. But you can see that this changes things, because then it's not just about making, I said before that the process of saving changes locally is intrinsically complicated. And so we can try and document it, simplify the explanations to try and make it easier to understand, but we're not going to be able to bash out the complexity. But the TiddlySpot experience, not so complex. Much more straightforward.
I think there was a saying, a phrase, catchphrase that I used last week about own it like a document, use it like a website. And I think that that's a wonderful concept, but that the use it like a website part by itself, that like for instance, if you go to Tiddly Spot, you don't really care about all this, it's your data, you own it, it's privately held, it's in a file on your own hard drive, or anything. It's about the functionality that TiddlyWiki provides. It's about the way you can structure your data as tiddlers and do filtering and such. It's about using the application as opposed to owning the application. And so the second part of the catchphrase about use it like a website, that's something that a lot of people just want to be able to make their own website simply and put a lot of power and sort of their own personal knowledge about how things should work. And TiddlyWiki makes websites easier to construct because it gives it brings a lot of that power down to a more accessible level for people to use. And that in and of itself is a very big draw. So something like Tiddly Spot, which basically hides all of that ugliness of downloading and setting up for saving and which browsers can save and whether it's file names on the and renaming on your hard drive. If you're not that concerned about owning your own data, a lot of people are perfectly fine with living in the cloud. TiddlyWiki as a cloud tool has a lot of power, and you don't need to jump over the hurdle of how do I install it. And so that's what I think Tiddly Spot brings to the forefront, is the power of TiddlyWiki as a tool as opposed to something you own and can customize and everything. A lot of people don't care about customizing. They just want something that gets the job done.
I think
that's really good.
I also think we should explore Tiddly Space a little bit more, as a TiddlyWiki 5 is Tiddly Space,
Yes.
because it seems Osmosoft at least now has terms of use in place now. So that there must be some interest. At least a lawyer has have a look at these spaces.
The issue there is, and this is sort of like as an ongoing question, is how long and at what level of responsiveness will BT support Tiddly Space, and would it be a good future pathway to say finding a way of self-hosting a Tiddly Space rather than having it done through a particular dependent organization?
Yeah,
Okay,
I think we need to ask them. So that the one big problem they have is communication, and even if you ask on the Tiddly Space Google group, they don't communicate, and I think this makes the whole process uncertain, so that you don't know, can we use this space again. But there are some, let's say, organizations that rely on Tiddly Space.
Let me just keeping rooted in the discussion we started with, which was should we be highlighting the route of using TiddlyWiki through Tiddly Spot as part of the getting started experience. So the specific proposal is when we go into getting started, we could have right up front, do you want to use TiddlyWiki on your own computer? That's more complicated. Or do you want to use it online? It's less flexible, and we can give people that choice, take them down one or other route. So that's an actionable thing we can do now. In terms of Tiddly Space, of course, you're right about it being, nobody is able to make plans about Tiddly Space without knowing what its status is, and that's very important. But in thinking about it, it's also worth remembering that there's quite a lot of work that would be necessary for Tiddly Space to offer a good TiddlyWiki 5 experience. So now, I'm not saying that we've got TiddlyWiki 5 running on Tiddly Space, and I believe that we can get it running for the community space without necessarily needing even the cooperation of Osmosoft. I mean, I don't think they need to do any development work or anything. But getting to the point where we can point end users at TiddlySpace as a preferred way of using TiddlyWiki 5, I think there's quite a few things that will need to be accomplished first. So it doesn't, until those things are done, and that's in terms of things like right now when you use TiddlyWiki 5 on TiddlySpace, you get all of the TiddlyWiki Classic bags and coming through, with all the system config tiddlers and stuff. So there's a bunch of bits and bobs that really need fixing up before it's practical for us to promote TiddlyWiki 5 on TiddlySpace.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So if we want to have, let's say, a good user experience with TiddlySpace, then Osmosoft needs to do something. So there needs to be some development. Also, like with TiddlySpot, so that they have it on the front page, so where you can decide, do you want to have a TiddlyWiki Classic or do you want to have TiddlyWiki 5? Yeah?
Yes.
When you create an account. Yeah. But first of all, we need to know if Osmosoft wants to do something like this. Yeah. So I think we need some contact, and the Google Groups is not the best place.
No, I think it's fair to say they don't seem that comfortable communicating there.
Yeah, it seems so, and communicating with me is probably more problematic. So.
I was going to move on because Daniele, good to see that you could make it. Do you have a microphone with you? Hi, Daniele. I'm guessing that Daniele is probably scrabbling for a microphone in the background, but if you do get a microphone running, Daniele, say hi. But I was going to suggest that we switch unusually to talking about a development topic, which is Daniele's recent work with Tiddly Drive. So that we've got there's a technical discussion that I think Daniele and I would very much like to have, but before we get dragged into the technical discussion, there's an also very interesting discussion about what Daniele has done and what his plans are for the future with that project. But just before I go into that, because that will take us through to the end of the Hangout, I think. Is there anything else following on from any other things that we've discussed that anybody wants to bring up? Any other points to raise?
I just want to suggest that we be very proactive in addressing the getting started items that we talked about this week. And what I want to suggest is that anyone who's interested should go and write their own version of a getting started tiddler, and that we can present them all next week in the group and see what the different flavors and styles that people have in mind are for an actual content and how it would look as a tiddler. So I suggest, as an experiment, we all cook up a getting started tiddler during this week, and that next week we bring them to the Hangout and see how they differ and what nice things people have put in them, and from that we can perhaps bash them all together and reduce it down to a really nice new getting started. And that way we will be very proactive in actually accomplishing that change in a week's time.
I would be remiss if I didn't show you this then.
Jeremy, you need to screen share.
I'm so sorry. I'm finding the link in my email first. Actually, okay, bear with me. So I mentioned that there's been a lot of discussion on the TW Docs group about the whole every topic related to improving the TiddlyWiki documentation. And I believe it's Jed Carty. Yes, Jed Carty has been working on this, no learning required -full.tiddlyspot.com, it's an attempt to really to make a better getting started. So you can see that he's trying to, within the context of getting started, give people a very brief introduction to the key concepts of TiddlyWiki, and so we can get rid of that guy and we don't see it again, or not. I do find when I use things on Safari, it's very clear that not everybody tests things in Safari. And he's tried to create kind of wizards for common operations. So here's the wizard for creating a tiddler. Here's the wizard for editing a tiddler. It's a pretty cool piece of work. I think it's it's the very essence of what I love to see with TiddlyWiki. It's somebody who's reimagining an aspect of, in this case, TiddlyWiki's operation, and has beautifully been able to fire ahead and do it. And you can see that he's obviously understood the tagging interface and has done a great job of rejiggling it to work in this new environment. So I was just bringing that up just to show that there is some existing work on the Getting Started Tiddler. We're a small community. Our best hope for progress, I think, is to work closely and build on each other's work. So I would encourage anybody who's not already involved in the TW Docs group to join up and read the discussions. There's some really interesting things going on there.
I have one question, a more technical one.
Tobias, go for it.
Plugins, or rather plugins using libraries, such as, Felix is using Viz, right? I'm planning on using something called Math.js. There are probably a bunch of libraries that are of interest to plugin authors. And I was wondering if it really makes sense that every plugin author is like putting it into their own repository rather than under some namespace that is more globally available. Like, I don't know. So that these things are a bit more independent from the actual plugins that want to make use of them.
Yes, I think there's an obvious opportunity to do that. I would hate to see Felix's work with Task Graph. It would have been a shame to have kind of slowed him down in order to get him to split it into two plugins. But I think what we're seeing with Viz.js is that because there's two plugins that use the same library, it is indeed bringing up the suggestion that we split the library into a separate plugin. But I think it's a good idea, and we should definitely do it where we've got shared libraries. But I think the cases need to come on their merits. And I clearly, when you look, there's libraries built into TiddlyWiki, in the TiddlyWiki core library, things like the Markdown plugin and the CodeMirror plugin. We could apply the same logic to those, but of course the usability would decrease because it would mean that in order to use the CodeMirror plugin, I'd need to include the CodeMirror library plugin and the CodeMirror implementation plugin. So
that doesn't make much sense. No, it's very But something like when I was going to use like Math.js, that sounds like a very generic thing. So other plugins may want to jump on the bandwagon and use it. So.
But the other thing that you can do, of course, is your plugin, that if you create the first plugin that embeds Math.js, then you can also expose it so that other plugins that want to use Math.js can just be dependent upon you. And that, it's a slight change around. It means that there has to be a way to have your plugin installed, but perhaps not be using its capabilities because you've just installed it in order to get the library for this other plugin to work. But there is a dependency mechanism in the plugin architecture. So a plugin can declare that it's dependent upon another plugin, but the upgrade mechanism, as it works at the moment doesn't even need to do that. But the if we were doing online installs, you'd expect to be able to select a plugin and it would automatically install the dependent plugins.
Okay. Good.
So, Daniela, are you microphoned up by any chance?
Me? Oh no, I'm Jed.
Jed, hello.
Oh, yeah,
Sorry,
up,
I
yeah.
meant to say hello. Very good that you could make it. You've been very active on the groups. We were just talking about your work. Were you viewing at the time?
No, I actually just got into my office, so I was able to get on.
Ah, cool. Well, very glad you could. Very glad that you could join us. Would you like to? We get people at the beginning of the Hangout to introduce themselves. We've now got to the point where there's, I think, 3 people who weren't here at the beginning. And Jed, you've not attended a Hangout before, I think. Would you like to just introduce yourself, say where you're from, and tell us something about your work with TiddlyWiki?
Well, I'm Jed. I am a graduate student in electrical engineering, working on my PhD, and I am in the Western United States, in Albuquerque. So the reason I haven't joined Hangout before is I keep getting the time zones mixed up and keep thinking that you guys start at noon here, which I'm not sure why. But and I started using TiddlyWiki Classic undergraduate years ago, and I made a mistake with it and lost all of my work and got very angry at it and didn't touch it until a few months ago when TiddlyWiki 5 came out of beta. And
Gosh,
it has been really, really useful for my.
Are you over the fact that you lost all your data with TiddlyWiki Classic, though? Do you think?
Oh, yes, that was probably 6 years ago. So I've been trying to get myself to use it again ever since, and now that there is a new interface and everything, that finally got me to do it.
Well, just before you joined, I was showing everybody your no learning required -full Tiddly Spot, and it was in the context that we've been talking about the need to improve the getting started Tiddler, and you may have seen a post earlier today from Stephen Kimmel, about his experiments with TiddlyWiki on new users. And one of the fascinating conclusions was that the user, he's only reporting on a single user test that he's done, and the user hit several blocks that Stephen had to kind of push them through. The frustrating thing is we've been having lots of discussion about improving the documentation, and this user didn't go near the documentation. So it's kind of a reminder that as well as the documentation, we also need to make sure that the basic user experience of getting TiddlyWiki running is as good as possible. And we've just been discussing whether one way of much simpler route to explain TiddlyWiki or to get people working with TiddlyWiki is actually to use it on TiddlySpot, because then TiddlyWiki behaves much more like a conventional web service. You sign up with a username and password, you use that username and password to log in and do stuff, and there's none of the confusion around downloading HTML files and so on.
Okay. Yeah, I had actually wanted to, for the no learning required things that I've been working on, for the create and edit tiddler as part of that, it seemed almost completely useless to me when I was looking at it and making it. And like the only justification I could come up with for it is that you could show that you can make them in a very simple, like structured way, and then move on to say, oh, and this is how you do it normally.
Well, that was very interesting. I mean, the first thing I thought when I saw this stuff was how cool it was that you were able to eviscerate the built-in templates and then reassemble them in this new form, and that's really cool. I kind of agree as a tool for generically editing. I'm not sure how much it adds, but where a technique is awesome is when you've got a specific, a sort of domain-specific type of tiddler that you're working with. So your contacts example is, I think, is already an example of that, where you've got an alternate creation form that displays all the contact fields, and you're avoiding showing them the sort of default naked view of the contact tiddler. But I think it's a wonderful technique, and we've talked a lot on the Hangouts about how, in terms of documentation, some people like things to be clear sequence of operations, and I think also with some user interface operations, people really like it being broken down like this, step by step. Makes it simpler to see where you are, simpler to look up help and so on, because you're on a little numbered step. Jed, the other bit of context for everybody is that you've also been working on what might be initial reusable editions for TiddlyWiki. Is this are you in a position to demo them? Because it would obviously be much better if you were able to demo them than me.
No, unfortunately, I can't get onto my normal computer with the Hangouts, and right now you're on my phone, so I can't really.
On your phone, okay.
That there, sorry.
No, a screen share off the phone would be cool. Well, I'm screen sharing here. I was just going to. You can perhaps direct me to the best URL. So I'm on No Learning Required. Where's the contacts or the task management prototype that you did?
Let's see. The contacts one, if I remember, is the No Learning Contacts DB, I believe. Let me check that. Yes, No Learning Contacts DB for that one. I don't think. Oh yeah, there's no required. It's just No Learning. I was not with my naming conventions.
You went off-brand.
Yes, and I think that's the only one that I've actually managed to put up. I messed something up while putting together the edition for the other one and got frustrated with it and went back to my other work.
Okay. Well, this, so we walked through briefly the No Learning Required full before. This, I think, is a really interesting example of an edition. I always tend to use the example of a GTD edition, but a contacts edition is a cracking example because it makes sense to everybody who's ever used an address book. So it's a really nice universal application. It also seems as though the presentation, so again, we've got this, looks like the same introductory text, and then we've got a form here for adding people and putting them in groups, and they're listed down the left-hand side. So I quite like the way that as editions go, this one hides the main TiddlyWiki user interface just by hiding the sidebar, so it's obviously available for people who are familiar with it, and and it presents an alternative user interface that's much simpler. So by default, using this thing, you don't have the challenge of jumping up and down between different tiddlers. It's much more like using a conventional bit of software. I mean, in fact, the design of it is very similar to the contacts application that's built into the Mac, which is probably no accident. So very pleased to see all of these things, Jed. Now I'm very keen that we actually get these things in as editions. It's something we've not done before, so we need to, one of the things that we'll need to do is kind of figure out how to present an edition clearly. So I'm imagining that the front page of tiddlywiki.com will say, here's how to get started with the basics, how to learn to save, how to sign up with TiddlySpot, and then choose your edition of TiddlyWiki, and there would be a list of familiar, concrete applications of TiddlyWiki. So we're now saying to-do list, contact management, scholarly notes, and yeah, not sure some others. And that clicking through would take you to a documentation TiddlyWiki that explains how to use the edition and offers a download button for an empty version of the edition. There's, and I'm summarizing here, Jed and I have discussed a lot of this on the groups, that for the best user experience, we would like to package all of the tiddlers that comprise the editions into plugins, and then that means that once a user has started using it, they'll be able to upgrade should we release a new version of the plugin with new function bug fixes and so on. So yes, I'm very pleased that you're kicking off with that stuff. It's and I guess, yes, to emphasize that I think it's an area. Please don't feel like you, Jed, have to get everything right, because getting these initial editions up is quite a big deal for TiddlyWiki. It's a big step, and we'll work collectively to get them right. But I'm very grateful to you for the way that you've approached this. Is really, I think, makes an excellent demonstration of the potential of an edition. And sorry, that to be clear, this is here the potential of an edition that's easier to use than TiddlyWiki itself. So I've often, I think, made this point that a useful edition for TiddlyWiki can be something that closes down options. TiddlyWiki goes out of its way to be super flexible and to be usable in any kind of scenario. That makes it complicated. So if we know that people's primary purpose is contact management, and we know that that means adding new contacts, editing them, and searching for contacts, then Jed's given a great demonstration of how we can streamline the interface to focus on just those tasks. So good stuff, and thank you, Jed, for that. And of course, you've also, I think, been very active in the TW Docs discussions as well, as I recall. Yes, indeed. So we're great to see so many people here. Daniela, I hope you can hear me. I'm sorry that you're not mic'd up. I think that we should. I think it would be easier to have the discussion if you were mic'd up. But maybe Daniela, as an offer, maybe we can find a time over the next few days before the Hangout to have a brief discussion, just ourselves. Okay, so Nathan is asking a couple of questions. I have a question with respect to the contacts list. What's the easiest way to do dynamic mail to links? And I think the answer to that is going to be via a macro that stitches together the parts that you need. I might throw this one to Jed, actually, and say, Jed, are you up to the challenge of, at the moment, I think you've already got an email field. I'm just moving over to go and check. Can we, yes, you do indeed. Can we make it so that that acts as a mail to link?
I do not see any reason why that would be a problem. Off the top of my head, I actually have no idea how to do this. I know very little about HTML or coding.
Oh, really?
This is
Oh, so
yeah.
you've done the thing. You've done the thing that often confuses me. You've done something quite complicated, and then you've said, "Oh, I don't do all the complicated stuff." But yes, okay. There must be a limit. But as I say, it looks like fairly meaty stuff that you've done. I can point you, if you found your way around navigating around the TiddlyWiki core code, I can point you at the one example that's like that, and that's the links in the sources pane. Let me screen share and show you. So on tiddlywiki.com in Tiddler info, oh, that's a bad example actually. In Tiddler info, we've got the sources panel, and you can see here there's a link to the GitHub edit page for this Tiddler. So that that URL is assembled from fragments and made into a link, and it's the you can see there it goes. It's the only place I can think of where the core is manufacturing a link from its component parts. So Nathan, was that that's a kind of starter, but I obviously this isn't the place for me to try and write out the code, but very happy to try to do so. And Nathan's just bumped in another question. Transclusions of HTML content seems to cause some paragraph tags to wrap the content, which can create problems when transcluding into a container element. This is an inline element. Can't put a block element inside an inline element, and it is creating some unintended hard breaks. Is there a way to avoid this behavior and get direct HTML transclusion without first going to plain text first? And Nathan's also just added it would be nice if it could work a bit more transparently. I guess the thing that is going on here is that, as we all know, TiddlyWiki primarily doesn't work by textual substitution, as you might call it. So when you see what TiddlyWiki does, transclusion and so on, you might expect that if I've got a tiddler here and it transfers the tiddler, that it'll go and get the other tiddler and splice it in. And it doesn't do that for efficiency. Instead, it's much more like the browser DOM, where individual parts of the wiki text are processed in a tree so that parts of that tree can be processed independently, and we avoid regenerating the whole page on every modification. And yet we see that the ability to do textual substitution to assemble bits of syntax from component parts is very powerful, and that's why we provide macros. So macros are, I think, the right way to solve this problem. I don't know if there's a the point I often make, I think, is that in TiddlyWiki we've got this kind of fundamental level of operation, which is widgets. That those are the lowest fundamental level of entities that we manipulate when we render content, and then we've got higher level syntax, wiki text syntax, which is parsed and converted into widgets. Yes, what am I trying to say? That there's a possibility that some of these concatenation requirements, that maybe there's some specific syntax that we could introduce to simplify those tasks, so that one doesn't need to use macros all the time. But Nathan's second question, sorry, I'm taking these in the wrong order, was about TiddlyWiki's paragraph tag generation. Funnily enough, Tobias and I have been discussing this week another problem where that's rearing its head. Yes, Nathan, it's been a problem for a while. The core itself mostly manages to avoid the edges of the precipices that are brought into existence by the way paragraph handling works at the moment. But there's a few places you may even have seen where we've got style sheet tweaks to remove the padding and margin from paragraph tags in the sidebar, for instance, so that we don't have the visual impact of these inadvertent paragraph tags. And it remains something that's I don't have a I haven't really I don't have a great solution to this at the moment. I think it's a very fundamental challenge that we've got. On the one hand, straightforward wiki text that I believe is from being rendered in with paragraphs, because that's the normal way of rendering paragraph content on the web. It makes it easiest to style and so on. And yet, we've also got places where it's not so much about writing narrative text to make constructions within TiddlyWiki where these paragraphs are completely getting in the way. So I recognize this is an area that we need to work on, and it's not even just the paragraph tag problem. At the moment, we've got some related problems where TiddlyWiki will generate divs inside spans, for instance, and that really should not happen. So, so yes, it's something that that needs to be worked on. Actually, you said, is there any way to avoid this behavior? The trick that the core uses quite frequently is to transclude in inline mode. So then the target tiddler will only be parsed in inline mode, therefore it won't generate any paragraph tags from the content of that tiddler. The downside, of course, is that you lose the ability to use block level syntax like headings, but in every case there is equivalent HTML syntax that can be used instead. But then that answer is that one's moving. It starts to look like it might be useful to have a content type for content that wiki text content that shouldn't have paragraph processing applied. But I'm not sure what the best solution is. Nathan's nodding in the background. Okay, so I need to draw to a close very soon. Daniela, really sorry that we couldn't have the conversation. As I say, do give me a ping. It might be that just having a quick chat over Skype would be useful. I guess since Daniela isn't able to speak, I should.
I'm able.
Oh, you are. Oh, great. Hello, Daniela.
Hello, hello.
Good.
I'm here just listening the conversation.
Oh, good. Well, sorry, I thought you were lacking your microphone. Now, I've seen that there's, in terms of the sync adapter discussion, I think you've made a couple of posts to the group that I haven't had a chance to read yet. So I'm a little behind in the conversation. But is there any questions or thoughts that it's worth discussing now, Daniela?
Yes, maybe one of them is there any way to give a special appearance to skinny tiddlers before it gets loaded?
A skinny tiddler is a tiddler that lacks a text field. So one can create a view template segment that filters for whether the current tiddler has a text field, and if it doesn't have a text field, include a message. That's something that should probably be in the core a little, because that message could be a little, loading indicator to tell people that the tiddler's on the way in.
Yeah, that's what's exactly what I was thinking about.
So I think it's a reasonable thing to do in the plugin. Just add the segment, and obviously it's a general purpose thing that should probably go in the core because it'll work with other adapters and so on that use lazy tiddlers. Sorry, lazy loading. Forgive me.
But the lazy loading is focused on one single adapter, right?
Well, the adapter architecture at the moment, there's a single syncer manager, and it just talks to a single sync adapter at a time. I think by the sound of it, what we want to get the best out of Tiddly Drive is the ability to run multiple sync adapters at once, so that I could be editing, saving locally to my Node.js server, and then from time to time, when I want to, pulling down and publishing tiddlers to Tiddly Drive. Is that right?
Yeah, the idea is to only keep sync of those that are coming from the server or that are manually set as saved to the server. So that not all the tiddlers, the wiki is not getting all the content from the server, just some tiddlers, some specific tiddlers. That was the idea.
You've seen how the lazy loading mechanism works at the moment. Is that only tiddlers that are opened will be loaded. So it'll at startup it gets all the tiddlers in skinny form, and the only time it loads the body is if roughly if you open one of those tiddlers. So it's a. Go on.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was just checking that you'd seen that was how it works at the moment.
I had a question, but I want to let you and.
No, go for it. I mean, my comment was a question for you. Really, was were you aware that that's how lazy loading works?
I'm actually have a question about how lazy loading works because I'm not sure what triggers a lazy load event.
Let me walk you through that. So I'm screen sharing in wiki.js. Sorry, Daniele, do you work in an editor or do you do all your work in the browser?
Sublime text.
Oh, great. Okay, so this is all familiar then. So wiki.js has a method getTiddlerText, and here it is. So we get the tiddler, we return the default text if the tiddler is missing. If it's got a text field, then we return it. Otherwise, we return null for the value of getTiddlerText, and we dispatch a lazy load event. So in the syncer, it has one of the first things it does in initialization is listen out for lazy load events, and then the handler for the lazy load event basically just does a load of a tiddler when it gets that trigger.
Yeah, and I'm quite familiar with the syncer code because I have been reading it.
So that's the trigger, and you can see here that there's quite a few places that call getTiddlerText, and they're all the places where the TiddlerText is required. If we do a global search, we'll presumably see more. So things like the server, you can see here when it's retrieving the site title, site subtitle, for instance, is using getTiddlerText. So there's a number of activities at a user level that will ultimately trigger a lazy load. Does that answer your question, Daniela?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what maybe also be helpful then is, I think I'm still screen sharing, your comments. The discussion was on the TiddlyWiki dev group, I assume. There was this quite interesting list. So the syncer is the only way of saving. I think we touched on that very briefly, that we need a way for the syncer to manage multiple sync adapters. To do the manual stuff, I was imagining that a plausible sounding approach would be to have some configuration tiddlers that can be set to specify whether certain operations are done manually or automatically. When they need to be done manually, that you do that by trapping a message So we've got that already in the, you will have seen in the Syncer module that we listen to, well, we listen to the lazy load event, for instance, and we listen to the change event. So we would be listening to these guys. Sorry, that's what I was really trying to show. We got some event handlers on the root widget looking for log in, log out. So there'd be a message TM manual sync, for instance, and that would have parameters, presumably, configuring how that sync should be performed. The timeouts, again, I think that it's been very easy to put those timeout values into configuration tiddlers, but we'll also need to update things so that the timeouts can be set independently for each sync adapter. So then the last point was how and when tiddlers are downloaded. Would the manual stuff that we were just talking about cover that?
Not actually, but let me Syncer can decide when to download tiddlers, just the Syncer, right?
Daniela, you cut out in the beginning of that sentence. I missed the beginning. It's about the Syncer deciding when to download tiddlers that have changed on the server.
I repeat, the sync adapters cannot decide when to upload or download tiddlers. That is decide on the Syncer at the Syncer level.
That's right. So it's the Syncer that will need to listen for these manual sync messages.
So I have to write a Syncer more than a sync adapter.
No, we need to modify the Syncer in order to support the use cases for sync adapters that aren't supported at the moment. So I mean, basically, in the core, with I just develop enough functionality to support what the core needs to do, and then the process I was mentioning in the discussion group is how periodically people then want to do a little bit more, and we have to re-architect things a little or refactor things to cover these use cases that move beyond what the core is doing. So the normal way of doing this kind of thing is, you were facing the question of, should I create new code or should I modify the core code, basically, is one way of looking at the question. And of course, you don't need to wait for me to modify the core code, because you can fork it and make the modifications that you need to, and then it's obviously easy to submit those as a pull request later. But I think the things that you want to do are, well, perhaps it would help if I talked a bit about where I see sync adapters going. We had a discussion just before the session started about the Tin Can API, which Ed Dixon raised. The Tin Can API is an API for storing learning records for learning management systems. And I found some documentation somewhere, which I seem to have lost again. Oh, here we go. Where basically, to save something to the server, they give it as an example with curl here, but you make an HTTP post request with a payload that is JSON. Now, I'm very interested in putting into the TiddlyWiki core facilities, that general purpose facilities for interacting with APIs of this type. So obviously there's an enormous amount of variation in the different types of API out there, and I'm not sure that it's a reasonable goal to try and make TiddlyWiki cope with all of them out of the box. But there are an awful lot of them that are like this one here, where it's a very straightforward case of a JSON payload, a couple of custom headers, and understanding how URLs are formed. So I see the syncer module as being the very beginnings of a generic architecture for synchronizing the Tiddler store with remote repositories. So for instance, I would like to be able to write my tweets within TiddlyWiki, and so I'd create a Tiddler tagged tweet, and then automatically that would trigger the Twitter syncer adapter to write that tweet to Twitter. And if Twitter's API let you edit tweets, then I would expect to be able to edit the tweet within my TiddlyWiki and for it subsequently to sync back up to Twitter's servers. Does that make sense? I'm trying to give a flavor for the kinds of things that I think the sync adapter can do, and it's all centered around this replication stroke synchronization of Tiddler content to a remote server.
Yeah, what you said is just one more way to do what I want to do. So if you are going in that direction, I will try to stick to that. If you create a generic way to communicate with APIs, I will try to write a server version that is just compatible with that AP way, and write a probably small plugin for communicate with it.
Yeah. And so I think that the art of this is that we need, I mean, that's brilliant to hear you saying that, Daniele, but we need to make it so that you can do that without it feeling like it's additional work, you know. There's a point that we raised in the group, you know, it's often writing one's own self-contained code can often feel easier because it's conceptually easier. You don't need to learn so much. So, you know, my job in this is to help you so that using the core code is easier than the other ways of working. Guys, I'm really sorry that we only got onto this discussion so late because I actually need to leave at this point. So as usual, we'll wave goodbye to everybody. But before we do, I'd like to say a big thank you to you all for your time today. Jed, it's great to welcome you to a Hangout for the first time, and I hope you'll be able to join us again. Daniele, Branimir, Mario, Nathan, Tobias, as ever, brilliant to see you here. Much appreciate your support and help. And you know, I won't summarize again the things that we discussed at the beginning, but it's a very useful session for me. So thank you very much. And everybody, cheers. I'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.